another weekly review. We're going to be looking at the trading week of March 30th, 2026. We're in the last week of March. We roll over to April on Wednesday for a new monthly open. Got some data this week. It is NFP week, so we'll go through this quickly. Monday, we don't have much except for Powell speaking at 10:30 a.m. Tuesday, we have PMI at 9:45. 10 a.m., we have JOLTS and consumer sentiment. Wednesday, we have 8:15 p.m. we have the ADP employment change, 8:30 retail sales, and then 10 a.m. we have ISM manufacturing PMI. Thursday, we have jobless claims at 8:30 a.m. And then Friday, we have NFP and we have the unemployment print at 8:30 a.m. So big things, obviously, back end of this week on Friday with NFP. Be interesting to see how the market reacts, how the market cares if swaps move potentially on NFP depending on the print. Obviously, the last couple of Fed meetings, the need, their idea of a need of a rate cut has been pushed further and further away. And we've priced out a lot of what was previously priced in or assumed to be priced in for rate cuts later this year. So the market obviously has had a bit of an adverse reaction to the fact that rates may be higher for longer, even though I think obviously from a macro perspective, all of us kind of agree that makes sense. It's just a matter of, how things get digested and so on and so forth. So tighter financial conditions for a little bit longer has been the, understanding now of the market. And we're starting to see, some of that take shape in the price action that we're getting. And obviously there's a lot of things happening in the world right now, which makes things in the trading world interesting. Can be difficult, can be easy some days, but at least we're getting some volatility. We're getting some big moves. So as far as bigger picture, we have every major time frame, again, one time framing down. So monthly, weekly, daily are all one time framing down. Sellers have been in control of this auction for a little bit until basically we see some sort of local bottom form, for a decent bounce, which I think we could get this week potentially early, or if we see, real capitulation and real volume into a low, signifying, some sort of swing low, which maybe we get that this week too. I don't really know. But I think as far as where this market is currently sitting on higher time frames, I think the likelihood of a bounce this week is probably quite high. It's just a question of, where do we get it? And, we're going to know it when we see it because it's probably going to be pretty violent, but where does that take place? So for me, last week was interesting in the sense of obviously the overnight move, Sunday into Monday open, this massive, hilarious, 200 point straight up move from a Trump tweet. I guess a taco tweet, if you want to call it that. Well, I was just laughing when I saw this. When I saw the open, I was like, "Oh, of course, of course, this is what happened." Funnily enough, my system actually fired a reversal signal right at the bottom of this. I did not catch this because this happened at 7 o'clock in the morning before I was even at my desk. I just got every price alert, and the sun went off and told me that price was 200 points higher, which is hilarious. So we had this massive move. This was one of those moves where, like, unless you're already positioned, you're not catching this. This was like a 2-minute candle that went up, 200 points. And, unfortunately, it's just one of those things where we have this, and then, the preceding 3 days of price action is basically trapped inside of a move like this. And that's very common. So, a move like this is very uncommon. So a massive move like this is very uncommon in, regular market conditions. But then what happened the following couple of days where we basically just backfill this range and this massive price vacuum that we had, that wasn't surprising at all to me. Thursday weakness, signifying into 6620s, again, not super surprising. We had a huge concentration of transactional volume in this area. So if you just look at this, like if you look at the line here, we have value area high, value area low, value area high, value area low, value area high, value area low, all concentrated in this action. So we have overlaps of where price isn't fair, if you look at it that way. But the big thing really too on the tape here is that we had a huge amount of absorption the day prior on the bid, and then obviously when we spiked up into it, we offered, and all of a sudden we couldn't get back above where we saw this heavy absorption on the bid, and then we just melted the rest of the session. We had another attempt to spike it higher. We had another one of those tweet bombs that came in on Thursday close, basically to try and spike it higher, and the market just isn't believing him anymore. That's how I look at it. Like we had a big again, a massive spike up, basically retracing the entire day's range, and it sold right back down. And then Friday we had the continued liquidation. We had a really nasty, slow trend day down. And again, for me, I do have a higher time frame reversal print down here as well in my system. So again, this is also leading me towards why I think we could see a bounce, for amongst other things, which we'll talk about. But the big picture for me is that it's either going to be, in my opinion at least, it's either going to be somewhere down into 6360s or down into last week's low that we potentially see some sort of decent bid or decent reversal come in. If we start losing 6360s this week, there's nothing for another 100 plus points down. So I will not be trying to catch a knife below 6360s personally, unless like there's something really, really obvious on the tape. There's a really obvious reversal. Below this, there's a big gap. There's a big void of any real support, in my opinion, down into 6200. So we could easily fall, another 100 points. So the big thing for me really going into Sunday open and Monday is how we trade around last week's low and how we trade basically around this high volume node, around value area low on Friday, around the M period spike base of 6412s. So if we're able to start bidding back above 6412s, then I think what we could see fairly quickly is we could see some of the late day buying that we had on around 6420s. We could see this start to get us back up into Friday's POC. That would be target 1, so 6460 basically. So if we start to bid 6410s, we'll look for that 6460 target. We have poor structure above us as well, so we have a true gap down that was never filled in the RTH session. So we'll be looking for 6410s bid for POC 6460s into this gap and gap fill up at 65, basically 6500, 6516s. Whether or not we can find buyers up into this gap, this is going to be my line in the sand for buyers this week. I think if we can start bidding above this gap, pretty self-explanatory. If we start to take back this gap, we have not a lot of structure here, very thin. If you look at last week's volume profile, we have very thin volume all the way down. So what I think we could easily see is a squeeze back up and take out the poor high from Thursday's session, at least traverse Thursday's value. So at least look for that move back to 6600s above the gap really, and then take out the poor high that we left at 6620s. Whether or not we have some sort of lower high form in this range, especially in this low volume area, it's entirely possible. So we could potentially see, squeeze back up. We start to see the offers start to hit back in, in the 6600, 6620 area, or even potentially as high as 6660s, last week's POC, and again another test of the 200-day moving average on the daily. The 20-day is green. It'll be down there in that region as well by that point because it'll catch up. So we could potentially see, another lower high start to form in the meat of last week's distribution up here. That's entirely possible. That's just one of those things I basically have to wait and see if we actually get it. So the big thing until the weekly gets put into balance, really, so until we really start to carve out, another larger trading range, sellers are going to continue to be in control. But with that being said, from a higher time frame perspective, down into this range into 6360s, we do have, potentially a lot of reason to look for potential bounce here. So we've got the bottom of old balance down here, 6360s. So I don't have this marked, but this is an old balance range that we have from 2025 that broke us up into the highs. We have the bottom of that old balance range here. We have, we're sitting at, -3, actually below, almost -4, but -3 on yearly VWAP. We're sitting at -3 basically on the monthly VWAP. So as far as from a reversion standpoint, when we start getting into those extremes, especially on a yearly basis, we do start to see a lot of algos pick it up and start to bid it, even if it's for a lower high. But as far as, from a shorting perspective, I'd be really hesitant to try and short more lows down here personally. It'd have to be really, really obvious for me to take a short trade into the lows down here, and it's entirely possible we get that. This market has been very weak, but as far as what I'd be looking for here, I would much rather look for longs in this range down into 63.60s potentially, have that really nice squeeze, a really violent rip back up, and then look for a lower high to keep the trend alive up into, you know, that 66.20 to 66.60 region, I think is how I'm going to look at this week. I'm perfectly happy to play both sides of this tape, and you know, if it's something where you know, I'm long into a trade, or I'm long on a trade and I start to see reasons to get out of it and start to see, you know, potential that we could have, you know, a decent high pivot start to form again, that I'll easily, you know, I'll flip. And if that ends up being wrong and we keep squeezing higher, I think it'll be fairly obvious this week on the tape, I would think, based on how much inventory we have on the short side basically built over the last couple of days. So big things really, 63.60 on ES is going to be like the bottom pivot for me. And then really what I'd want to be is I'd want to be a buyer above 64.10s. 64.10s, 64.20s, I'd really want to be a buyer and just ride a squeeze back up to see if we could fill POC, see if we can fill the gap, see if we can get back up into the meat of last week's distribution, potentially a poor high, clean up the structure into 66.20s. Could get a really nice, fast, violent rip back up on a really nice short squeeze. It's entirely possible. There's just a lot of reasons why I think that's possible this week. NASDAQ is the exact same thing. So bottom pivot for me is going to be 23.020s, basically 23K, you can call it. But it's the same idea. So basically line in the sand for buyers down here for me is that, you know, if we start to puke again, I don't want to be long below this. I would want to be long on good bids down here, and again, bids above 23,300s, the M period spike base, the meat of last week's lower distribution, I guess Friday's lower distribution. And I'd want to see this get cleaned up into POC, into the gap fill. And again, I think we could accelerate pretty fast and get a really nice short squeeze if we're bidding above 23,770s, if we're bidding above that gap, if we're bidding above where we saw this news buyer down in here, which is the same thing that we saw down in here on ES. So again, lower high could easily form. Like we have another unfilled gap on NASDAQ here too, but we could easily see a lower high start to form below or into the meat of last week's distribution, again into the POC at 24,400. But again, I don't really want to look for continuation short trades down here unless it's really, really, really obvious, because I think we'd be shorting potential local lows down here. What I want to see for a really good low, for a really solid swing low, I'm not sure. I don't see it yet. I want to see a lot of volume. I want to see, you know, real capitulation. I want to see I don't want to see a controlled sell like we've had for the last couple of days. I want to see violence. I want to see a VIX spike, and I want to see, you know, longs really, really puke, and I want to see no bid. Like a nice solid day that just is down like this, but it looks panicky. And so far, I just don't see that. Like I don't see true panic. Even though VIX is over 30 and close over 30, I don't see real panic yet. This looks too controlled yet. So haven't seen it yet. Possible we get that this week. Possible we do have a nice bounce from, you know, the range that we have in last week's low. Going to be keeping an eye on that. Going to be open to shorts, you know, higher if we see it. And that's how I'm going to try and play this week. It's really going to be really around, you know, how each of these days shapes out. So if that helps, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much.